Elijah jumped in and separated them, but in separating them, he hit the neighbor lady on the back. I think he pulled her hair back too, I think is what it said. Hello, welcome to Mix It Up, Black History and the Restoration, where we mix up a recipe while we mix up the restoration and learn about early Black members of the church. I am Taylor Ricks, and today we are going to be talking about Elijah Abel Jr. He is the son of Elijah Abel, one of the first Black men to receive the priesthood in pioneer times. While we mix up my version of stroganoff. It's not authentic, but it's easy, the kids like it, and it's super delicious. So, we just get started with some ground beef and some dried onion or crushed onion to cook while we learn about Elijah Abel Jr. So, Elijah Abel is the son of Elijah Abel and Marianne Abel that we talked about during week 3. We've been talking about his brothers this month and the last few weeks. I don't know if he is the 4th or 5th child, but when he was 1 year old, the census came to his home and he was recorded as a 1-year-old, and he was one of 5 children in the home. So we know he was a little bit further down the family line. He was born on Christmas Day in 1859, on Christmas Day, and was named after his father, obviously. So his mom died when he was pretty young. She was young and he was fairly young when she died. And so his dad struggled financially throughout his life. He rented a room and different things, but eventually Elijah ended up living with his siblings. So he lived with Enoch, Moroni, their sister Annie, and her husband. A single white woman was listed in the census as living in their household as well, and a maid. And so in all, it turned out to be like 8 adults living in this home together. And during that time in the Salt Lake area, when he lived with all those siblings, his job that he picked up was just to be a day laborer. So again, kind of following in the footsteps of his brothers and his dad, he was just kind of finding jobs wherever he could get them. To make ends meet. And so he lived kind of that poor lifestyle. Also, like his brothers that we talked about in weeks past, he had multiple run-ins with the law. It almost makes me wonder if the Abel family was just kind of like, their name was maybe soiled or something, like, oh, if something goes wrong, we're going to blame Abel. I don't know, because it's just interesting that so many of the brothers struggled with things related to the law. But the first run-in that Elijah Jr. had, a man by the name of Hank Graves showed up to a police department, and he was like bruised and bloody and all gross, and he told the police department that Elijah Jr. had beat him up and had bruised him up and attacked him. And so that was kind of the first run-in with the law, so to say, Elijah Jr. had. He didn't really serve any time for that accusation, so he must have been found innocent or they didn't press charges. But that was kind of the first time that we really see like newspaper articles or different records of him getting involved with the police. So he had little minor infractions going forward, but when he was about 35 years old, he met his wife, and her name was Francilda Harwood. She was an immigrant, much like Moroni's wife from last week, and she was also Caucasian, so they were mixed race. So when he married her, it was still legal for people to marry outside of their race. But soon afterwards, like 3 years after they were married, it became illegal. Around the same time that they got married, Elijah began the process of passing as white. So that is actually more complicated than it sounds. In the 1800s, Black people would pass as white so that they could avoid, obviously, all of the torturous things that happen to Black people. And it's kind of a twofold process. Because first of all, society has to allow you to pass as white. I don't think I could pass as white, right? Because I clearly have, you know, a darker skin tone. So society itself has to decide that you pass as white. But then also the individual has to make a conscious decision and an effort to pass as white, which means a lot of times they have to denounce their family, because it would be impossible to pass as white and then have the world know that your mom or dad is black. It just wouldn't work. And so for him to start passing as white, some things that he did was he changed his birth date publicly and on all sorts of like birth records. Every record he could change it, he changed his birth date to make him 5 years younger, which I'm like totally all for that idea. However he was able to do it, I want to know. He also changed his birthplace. So he changed from being born in Salt Lake City on all the records, he changed to saying that he was born in California, in a county there. He, as we know, his mom had passed away, his dad maybe had passed away by this time as well, and so he separated himself from his family. So that is another way that he passed as white, is by separating himself from his family. Little side note, do you guys ever do this? Paper towels to drain the fat. Ooh, I don't like very much fat in my ground beef, so this is just what I've always done. Okay, and then I can just throw it away and it doesn't like clog my drain or anything. All right, so he did all of these things to pass as white, and from then on, he was seen in census records and community records, church records, and different wards that he was in as white. So apparently society accepted his efforts to pass as white, and he continued them and continued some of the lies of his age and different things like that throughout his life to his death. So as he was doing that, some other run-ins with the law that he had was that he was a witness to a murder. And what had happened was that Burton Morris was murdered by John Benbrook. When John saw Burton, or found out about Burton having dinner with his wife. And so there was an alleged affair. Well, I guess Elijah Abel was out at night around that time. He was like across the street from the bar where the shooting took place, and he heard and saw some gunshots, saw some dark figures that he assumed was the two mentioned before, and so he was put on trial to testify. The judge was not impressed with his testimony, neither were the attorneys. They were frustrated that he wouldn't just answer questions. He kept like elaborating on his answer. I'm like, oh, that sounds like me. I would be terrible at this job too. And he, I guess like his story changed slightly from one day of testimony to the next. So the court wasn't thrilled with him, but we do have this fancy picture of him. This is the only picture we have. And it came from the court records of him testifying in court. So that's exciting. That must be him acting out the shooting or whatever happened that he witnessed. So that was another time that he was in court and saw people in court. A year later, so his wife and him had a son by the name of Leo, and he was their only child. And we're going to talk about Leo in future weeks as well. Well, a year after he was a witness at this court case, Leo had done like a trade of his toys, which, okay, this is such a typical kid thing. It was kind of a fun story because I'm like, whose kid hasn't done this? But he traded his toys with a neighbor kid, and his parents did not feel like it was a fair trade or like he should have made that trade. And so his mom and Elijah went back to the neighbor, and they were like, yeah, we don't allow this trade or whatever. Can we trade back? And the two moms like started fighting. It was like written down as like a hair pulling match where they were literally fighting each other. The neighbor husband just like stood there and watched. He didn't do anything. And Elijah jumped in and separated them, but in separating them, he hit the neighbor lady on the back. I think he pulled her hair back too, I think is what it said. Like, it just got really out of hand. And the neighbors wanted to press charges. I mean, I would love to know what toy it was that they traded, that this was like totally worth all of this drama over. But they went to court and they're trying to explain, to the judge the situation. It's a trade gone bad, And the neighbor lady went nuts. She's standing up, jumping over benches, yelling, screaming. She ended up getting held as contempt of court because she was being so crazy. And I think because of that, the judge was just everybody needs to just work this out and move on. And I think that this story, because Elijah didn't get in trouble, even though it sounds like he did kind of assault her a little bit by trying to break up the fight, I think it does show that he really did pass as white. He was successful in his attempt to do that, because at that time, a black man against a white woman would have been absolutely catastrophic, no coming back from that, and he would have been held in a very high regard. In fact, at that time, some people were even put on death penalty charges and things like that for that interracial interaction. And so I think that further shows that he really was successful at denouncing his family, identifying details, and passing as white at the time, which is just really interesting. And obviously not something that people really can do now. It's really hard to do. Even though we hear people mention it sometimes, I don't think it really works out. You would have to completely leave your family, and it's a whole thing. But he was obviously able to do it. Most of his life, Elijah worked as a teamster, but he worked for a lot of different companies, leading teams of animals to do different things. And at one point, as he was getting older, Leo started taking care of his parents financially. Leo had a liver disease, and he wanted to join the Navy, but because of the disease, they wouldn't let him for a really long time. Finally, they let him join, and a year after joining, he did pass away from that liver disease, but it left his parents in financial ruin. The Navy gave them $5,000 in $72 a month payments for life insurance, and they also gave $100 for Leo's burial, but it still wasn't enough for them to make ends meet. In fact, Elijah's wife wrote a letter to the Navy asking for more money up front from the $5,000 or something, but she also asked to be factored in on some different grants and things. Well, none of it worked out, but thankfully Elijah was able to get another job with a different team and was able to start earning some more money, although they were pretty poor throughout most of their life, just as many of the other able family members were throughout their lives. Well, so he was getting pretty old by this point. In fact, he was 18 years older than his wife, although when he chose his new birthday, it made him only 13 years older, which might be why he chose his new birthday. But when he was 82 years old, he was riding a bus, and a car ran into the side of the bus that he was sitting on, and it injured him pretty significantly. He was in the Utah hospital for 12 days, and then a few days after that, he passed away from cardiac arrest. And so we don't know if it's a coincidence or if the stress of the car accident kind of led to his passing, but he was quite old and passed a little bit before his wife. But on his headstone, it still lists his new birth date that he chose, the 5-year younger one, which further shows that throughout his life, even into and beyond death, he was making a very concerted effort to be passing as white for all those various reasons: his marriage, his family, his financial success, and so many other things. And I think it is so sad that there was ever a time that anyone in our culture and community ever had to denounce their family, change everything about themselves to be able to pass as something more acceptable or more loved, just to be able to live a normal life as everyone else. And so I think that's why these stories are so important to me to share. I don't ever want to forget that these individual sacrifices for me and for my children, and I just think that we as a society would benefit so much from remembering their stories and their contributions going forward. It reminds us of the importance of individuality, family, and loving and accepting everyone who and how they are. So that is the story of Elijah Abel Jr. We'll see you all next week. Goodbye.